happy Monday morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And wow, it's great to have our good friend Anton Chaitkin back to discuss volume 2 of his book, big 3-volume projected history of the United States, Who We Are. Anton Chaitkin, thank you so much for making time for us here at McDuff Lives. We always appreciate it.
Well, John, you're my favorite. So it's an honor and a privilege to be on your show. I love talking to you.
And you, and it's wonderful, really. I've read so much of your stuff, but I probably haven't even read half of it. But going back many years now, when I first discovered treason in America, and a whole new way of looking at American history. And now you've dedicated years now to producing a history that summarizes your work. And how's that process going for you, just generally? How does it feel?
Well, I completed the second volume out of 3. I'm starting to work on the third. Second volume is about the 19th century, and this represents something new entirely in American history. That is, there's not been any detailed history of the people who built the country, the actual people, the strategists, the builders, who were in a continual mortal conflict with the financier transatlantic gang centered in London that was extended into New York, earlier the slave owners. But over my book goes the first century, and then century and a half. The third one will go 2 centuries from this revolution through John Kennedy. And this is very timely now because of 2 sensational issues that are before the public. One, obviously, is the wars and the attempt by some, Trump to some extent, and other people, and the public wants this, to stop the perpetual wars, which were aiming to the brink of extermination of civilization, the Israel War and the Ukraine War, both of them proxy wars for Britain and the USA. So that's, the public sees, okay, that's got to stop. Trump is engaging that. What's the background of that? How does that relate to our history? Number 2 is the tariffs. And this is very sensational. Again, the public is very much, especially the working people of the country, and many businessmen want to get protection for our industry and to get new industries and a rebuilding of the country. The tariffs are a controversial issue, but you can't understand them at all without the history that I'm dealing with. To understand what I've done in this and how absolutely central this history is to what we're facing right now, I'd like to bring up just one point in the volume 2 that was just published, that came out in April. This book, 600-page book. So I know you're reading parts of this book to your audience. What is that? Once a week, or how do you do that?
Well, yeah, Tony. For the past, I think 7 weeks now, I've read 1 hour of the book, and when I started it, my intention was to just read parts and then make comments. But I found it so important to just keep reading through the text that I'd say 95% of what I've done over those 6 weeks has been pure Tony Chaikin text, and a few comments from the peanut gallery here. But I'm up to about page 200 of the 600 pages.
Yeah.
So, folks, if you want to catch up, you can find my readings on my Rumble, YouTube, and X channels, also on Facebook, although the Facebook ones will disappear after a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So my YouTube channels or the Rumble channel, McDuff Lives, all 6 previous readings are available, and I hope you take advantage of that. And I thank Tony for the honor of reading it. I want to do what I can to spread the content of the book as much as the book itself, because as you say, this is a whole new look. And before the show, you mentioned that you wanted to start from the end of the book. Most authors
exactly.
give away the punchline before you read the first 400 pages, but this is your show, so let us hear it from your point of view. Where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, you can get the book so that you really follow along with what John is doing and reading it.
Of course, I should have mentioned
on Amazon, the paperback or Kindle. Probably paperback would be better. You want to see John reading it, but so what I'd like to
get
do
a copy of the book. Don't listen to me. Just read it. Come on.
No, it's much better. Things read,
Yeah.
Even Plato's dialogues were meant to be performed, live. So I want to situate things by a very dramatic climax that occurs in the history. I have it in chapter 9, about the rise of what were called economic royalists. That's a title that Franklin Roosevelt put on these criminal Wall Street and London financiers.
I like that.
And so the central character within Wall Street and within the USA from the enemy side is J.P. Morgan. And his bank, the Morgan Bank, was established in the USA in the early 1870s. And it's crucial to understand who these people are, because they became the kings of Wall Street, and they were the enemy. They represented a foreign invasion of the United States, specifically from Britain. Their allegiance as an international bank was not just to England, although that was part of it, but to a hierarchy which is sort of mystical in London and some overseas from London, of people who think of themselves as gods replacing the God. Really, that's the way they think, over mankind. And they were horrified and terrified of the United States being an independent republic and spreading the influence of the ambition for progress all over the world. So, first of all, the Morgan Bank, as everybody who studies this knows, was originally a British bank. His father, Junius Morgan, was in London as a member of a bank that was originally called Peabody, and they imported slave cotton and so forth. A typical British firm, but during the Civil War, this British firm, this is before there is any J.P. Morgan company in the United States. This is just British. During the Civil War, young J.P. Morgan was over in Wall Street, but he didn't really have his own firm. In England, his father was part of the London establishment, Junius Morgan and Company. And what they did, first Peabody and then Junius Morgan. So what they did over there was they financed the Confederate embassy in Paris. I have this whole thing in my book. This is all, a lot of this is covert, but it's all available through the established biographies and established archives that anybody can get at. They also funded the Emperor Maximilian, the French installed emperor in Mexico, and they were doing dirty operations in Canada as well. So they were trying to strangle the United States during the Civil War. And young J.P. Morgan in New York was speculating against the dollar, speculating in gold. He was sending American gold over to London and so forth. So what happened in the early 1870s, the American nationalists, who are the real nation builders, the ones who build up every industry, main industry in our country, high wage industries, they were for protectionism. They were for America's growth. They were against imperialism. They didn't believe in the British Empire. They separated us from that, going back to Ben Franklin. And they wanted everybody in the world to have sovereign nations. And we would help them all grow, but we would concentrating on the interest of our people. This whole thing terrified the British. So what happened is that there was a project that was particularly horrifying to the British, and that was it was the building of a second transcontinental railroad that was supposed to go from the Great Lakes out to Seattle. This would be the Northern Transcontinental. It was called the Northern Pacific, and this was a project of this nationalist group in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the center of American strategy for the whole period of Lincoln's presidency, some years before that, and especially through Lincoln's presidency up to the end of the 1870s. That's the center of American nationalism and the center of the building up of our industries and of our power as a nation. So this railroad was supposed to go out to Seattle, and it was getting government funding like the original transcontinental did that went out to San Francisco Bay. And it was also a private project of this Philadelphia group. The Pennsylvania Railroad was at the center of that. Jay Cook was the banker for this, and he was a Philadelphia banker, not Wall Street. These are not speculators and criminals like you have in the Wall Street, London, and offshore banking who are just interested in money. They want to develop the country. So what happened is that Morgan, the father, Junius Morgan, set up a partnership in Philadelphia for his son, J.P. Morgan, and for a Philadelphia banker named Drexel, Anthony Drexel, who were against the nationalists. They opposed the whole attempt to industrialize the United States, and they were not going to invest in it. So what they did is they started a gossip campaign against the banker for the Jay Cook, who's the banker for this Northern Pacific Railroad project. One of the things that horrified him about this projected railroad was that you go out to Seattle and you've got huge transport of agricultural goods from the Midwest and Upper Plains. You've got settlers going out there. You've got imports and exports through the West Coast. But particularly, it's our launching point for Asia to hook up with our friends in Japan, in China, and in Russia. All of those countries were targets for American friendship and improvement. We were helping them to develop, particularly Japan and Russia, to make them strong countries. The British said, if this goes on, and if America can somehow get China out of our clutches, then the game's over for the British Empire. Then India's next. So and also Canada. The people in Canada saw this railroad right on their border, going across the northern Great Plains, and they wanted to join the USA. and give up allegiance to the crown. There was no nation of Canada at the time. All this is in the book. So what happened? This new firm of Morgan and Drexel down in Philadelphia began putting out rumors and gossip and newspaper lies saying that this banker Jay Cook and the railroad itself was completely bankrupt and could never succeed, and you better not give them any credit, and you better sell off any credit you have, stocks or anything. And by 1873, in the summer, this brought Jay Cook down, because the Philadelphia people were, they were powerful. They had wonderful big industries and machine tools and locomotive companies, but they were not massive financiers. They didn't have billions of dollars like the transatlantic, like the London Gold.
Yeah.
So what happened is that there was a crash when this railroad failed. When Jay Cook had to close his doors as a banker, everybody that had invested in America got panicky and sold their stocks. Many places collapsed. J.P. Morgan, the son of the British banker, made $1 million off of this. He's the only one who made a fortune off of it, and used his proceeds to set up a palace of an office in Wall Street. And that was the origin of the J.P. Morgan firm. The downfall of the Philadelphia nationalists. These American nationalists continued to do what they were doing for a while. One of the great enterprises they were involved with that freaked out the British was they were creating the steel industry. There was no steel industry before the Civil War in the United States. The Philadelphia nationalists built it. Pennsylvania Railroad built it. You'll get to that in chapter 7. They also were organizing a petroleum industry before Rockefeller got into it. They were the ones promoting tariffs. They were the ones promoting the growth of other countries to defy the British Empire. So all of these projects were the British transatlantic pro-imperialist bankers. That is now our establishment. That's where it started. We're trying to interrupt this dynamic development of our country. We still went ahead with two great projects. Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, who was a protege of Tom Scott, the head of the Pennsylvania Railroad, he built the greatest steel mill in the world after the crash even. And then Edison was sponsored by these Philadelphia nationalists. I have all this in the book. And they had to defy Morgan again and again to allow Edison to set up the first power plants across the USA, starting in Pennsylvania, for power plants for the public. There was no such thing. We got electricity, we got steel, we got petroleum, we got all of these power developments from the patriots. I call them progressive nationalists. And that is the start of this establishment trying to destroy the progress of the United States. That's the enemy. That is our ancient enemy, going all the way back to the American Revolution. I have that in the first volume, and I have it in the Treason book, Treason in America, which you referenced. The identity of these Boston, New York, and London, this axis that we have. But that's our establishment. Now, you can't understand, the reason I'm bringing this up now, you can't understand tariffs, which were a tool of these nationalists to protect us against the British imports. You can't understand the tariffs. You can't understand the constant wars of the empire, the Anglo-American wars. You can't understand any of that unless you know who we were against that kind of thing, or for the tariffs, or what the enemy is, especially who is the enemy. What is this establishment? Many people, not just conservatives, liberals, trade unionists, farmers, people of all kinds are anti-establishment. What do they know about this? You can't understand this unless you have this fight that's gone back all throughout our history between these two sides, not just some supposedly godlike establishment that knows everything and plans everything. That's baloney. They're not eternal. They've been around in some sense since the dawn of time, but so has human creativity, our side. But this is the sharpest fight there ever was in the world between these two sides. And it's right there in the middle of American history. And I've brought it out in my work here. So that's the significance of this story.
And not having read that far in the book, I did not ever know the story of the Northern Pacific Railroad the way you just told it. The whole railroad story, it's the Golden Spike, right, and Utah, and but then I also studied the alternative at that time. But now we're going backwards into your earlier chapters, I suppose. To look at the fight between the so-called Southern route and Northern route that was going on before the Civil War, and Jefferson Davis, of course, was championing the Southern route, and if the Southern route had won, then they would have had slave plantations all the way from Texas to California. That was one thing that is hardly ever mentioned, but it's a huge blessing that we didn't get stuck with the Southern route. But then now tell us a little bit more about the choice to go with the San Francisco route.
Well, I want to amplify what you just said, because anybody who studies American history with the standard texts will see that there was this contest between the Southern route and the Northern route, which sort of puts the whole Civil War into simply North versus South. And there's a deeper dimension to it, because the problem with the South is, to the extent that they were part of this empire, the empire is the one that degrades and wants cheap labor, and slavery was part of that. So this is a global system they were part of. What happened that people don't know about today is that Jefferson Davis and his friends, after the Civil War, were induced to support a very positive Southern enterprise that was pioneered by the Philadelphia Nationalists. What happened is that during what was called Reconstruction, and this is in chapter 8 of the book, one of the enterprises alongside the Northern Pacific that was projected by the Pennsylvania Railroad and this nationalist faction was to build a Southern route at the same time, going out from the Southern railroads to Texas, through Texas, and from Texas to San Diego. And at the same time, the Pennsylvania Railroad built a whole bunch of new lines in the South as part of an attempt to industrialize the South and get rid of the plantation system, modernize the South, change the South for the benefit of the South, for the benefit of everyone there, white and black. Because if you raise the wage level and you have industry that needs skilled people, needs education, needs modern conditions to function, use the iron and the coal and resources and the water, power and so forth down there, then you're undercutting the whole previous feudalistic system. So what happened is that Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad got old Jefferson Davis and many Southern leaders from the past to support the modernization of the South. This again horrified the New York, Boston, London people, because they wanted to keep plantations in the South. They didn't want industry there. They didn't want the South connected to the rest of the world and to the North. They didn't want immigrants to be able to go into the South and get high-paying jobs. Then what happens to cheap cotton that they get from sharecroppers? You know, that continuing the old slave system in everything except the legal idea of a slave, right? So that's part of the showdown that was going on in the 1870s, and they betrayed and destroyed this Reconstruction. It was the nationalists who stood up for the black people in the South after the Civil War. It was the Pennsylvania nationalists like Thaddeus Stevens, an iron manufacturer, high tariff man. He demanded that the black people get land from these old plantations and that they should industrialize. Pig Iron Kelly, Kerry's right-hand man, who was a congressman, went down south and said, "Let's build industry. Let's have modern times. You don't have enough skilled labor. Look at these black children in these schools. They could be geniuses. Just look at what they're doing in the school. I've seen them. We could all have a flourishing time, white and black here, for everybody's interest." That's how you have to appeal to people. Don't pit one race against the other. So this was the proposed program, and they began doing it by the Pennsylvania nationalists, and that's after the Civil War. During the Civil War, you had this first. All of this was part of Lincoln's way of thinking, and some of it was his legislation. The Northern Pacific and the first one were both his idea. But there was the building of the first transcontinental was somewhat complicated by a less than desirable financial scheme that ended up getting a lot of hanky-panky with the money of the railroad. And the Philadelphia nationalists, who had been involved with it to begin with, basically withdrew from that process because they didn't agree with Wall Street dominating the world, and London in particular dominating the world, and having financiers dominate our industry. They thought that people who are building industry should continue building, that railroads should be for the purpose of serving the public and the general economy, and you make a profit by doing something useful. That was their point of view. But the first transcontinental was a great achievement of our country and Lincoln's idea. So all of these things are in this book, and all of these things are. I've only started this kind of history, and this is what we have to pursue. I'm 82 years old now. I'm not going to be around, forever. So the American people and the people of these other countries that are engaged with us or against us in some way have the right and the need to know who America is, and it's not these crazed killers, hanging out around in the cellars of the Pentagon, or in some planning thing for wars, or in some bank that is offshore funding drug money, or all these things, or King Charles's butler, and his privy council. That's not the USA. How did we get into being part of that? There was several coups d'etats against our country that put us into this alliance with England, our enemy. And we're not enemies of England as a nation, but this transatlantic pigsty and crazy group that believes that mankind is just trash and is not entitled to progress. That's our enemy. And it's clear only when you see the two sides.
Yeah. Wow. And the problem has just turned into, a million times worse since the 19th century, as far as I can see. The tentacles of that empire stretch into every human being's life. And it's very, very effective. But I am sure that the principal reason that somebody like you takes the time and effort to write this book is to help us see the way back to who we really are and who we really are supposed to be. I wonder if you could comment on the Hayes Tilden election, since we were covering that period of time, and who was on which side, and how did that affect the currents that you've just described?
Well, that was the election of 1876. Rutherford Hayes was the Republican nominee, and Tilden, Democratic nominee. Tilden was for free trade. So this is the old, basically British aligned Democratic Party of that day, and also it involved the Southern Confederates. But then Hayes was more and more under the influence of the New York and particularly Boston financiers and Anglophiles and people related to British.
So no good guys in this election.
Well, I mean, this is usually the case in our history. So what happened is that this election was in 1876, and it was after the crash that I described of 1873. The U.S. was in a depression induced by Morgan in particular, and the nationalists were weakened, the Philadelphia-centered group. But the Pennsylvania Railroad was still promoting this Southern development. There were still some troops in the South guarding the black people from being murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. But the proposal was, and this was Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad, he made a proposed deal for the presidency. And he said, look, let us have the Republican candidate be backed. He's for tariffs. He's not this free trade candidate. But let us get Democratic support in the South behind him as part of a deal to build a great Southern railway network all the way to the Pacific, and to have river and harbor improvements paid by the federal government, and to build up industry and to have investment in the South. The North got investment. We have all of the agriculture department. We have the Homestead Act. We have the tariffs, everything that benefited the working people, the white working people of the North. What about benefiting the South? And really, that would the black people as well, right? Because then you're transforming the South. So that was the Tom Scott deal that was proposed, and on that basis, they got support from Southern Democrats, not Northern Democrats. They were too much tied into New York financiers and London. But the Southern Democrats were swinging over to this idea of let's get out of just being a garbage pile of feudalism. Let's have modern times here. We can all benefit from that. Surprising everybody. Well, what happened was, and the Republican candidate Hayes actually traveled to Washington when he was elected in a railroad car supplied by Tom Scott, the Pennsylvania Railroad. So this was Tom Scott's deal. And what happened is that the election went to Congress, and they set up a commission. It was very close, and so forth. It was decided in Congress, but the deal went through. Hayes was proclaimed the president. And then under the pressure of Morgan, of the Boston Brahmins, the Anglo-American cabal, this transatlantic group that was established then, They are the ones who broke their promise. They reneged on the deal. Hayes was president, but he promptly took the troops out of the South to relieve the Southerners, supposedly, without engaging in federal support to rebuild the South, to make it modern. So it was turned over to the old slave owners to have cheap labor plantations. J.P. Morgan went into some areas. He took over the Southern Railroad, so it was something called the Southern Railroad. It was just built by the Pennsylvania Railroad people.
Hang on. I rode the Southern Railroad.
Yeah.
That was my first train when back in the 50s. My mother was from Atlanta, so we would go down to Union Station in DC and get on the Southern Railroad. It's a beautiful ride.
It's a beautiful ride, but it wasn't built by J.P. Morgan. He just took it over, and put his stamp on it, and eliminated the purpose of the whole thing, which was to transform Southern society. In Tennessee, for example, J.P. Morgan took over the iron and coal companies and took over the politics of the state. And so they did have some industry, but typically in this period, they, instead of having, high wage labor as a result of building up modern and capital intensive industries, they used jail prisoners. That's the model of cheap labor, degraded labor of the globalists today for every continent, including the USA. That's their model. And if some people have prosperity in present day America, it's only because they've skimmed the cream off in terms of the real physical economy of the world and of our own country. Our country is rotted out in terms of the population's conditions, in terms of our infrastructure. But so you mentioned the Hayes-Tilden election. That was the end. Right then, from that 1877, when that was decided, 2 years later, Henry Carey died, the economic advisor to Lincoln. Lincoln had been murdered. Two presidents came later who were nationalists. That was Garfield and McKinley. Both of them were murdered, like Lincoln had been. And so there was one historian that I cite in my book. His name is C. Van Woodward, who did a great job in bringing out what was the real content of this deal for the presidency. The other historians lie about it because everybody knows about that from reading C. Van Woodward. He's very famous. So they just lie and omit Tom Scott and the whole idea that you have to transform backward areas, and that's your solution to make them modern for the common interest of all. And it's against what is perceived as the interests of the imperialists. That part of our history is left out. So now what? Who wants the globalist wars? Now, who do they benefit? Talk about Israel. Does the war to destroy Gaza and destroy the people living in the West Bank, does that benefit the Jewish people? There was a guy named Norm Coleman who just went over. He was a former senator from Minnesota. He went over to, I think this was in Israel. There was a conference, and he's Jewish, and he went over there, and he's a real advocate for the Anglo-American and Israeli wars. And he said in this conference, the Jews are the masters of the universe. My God, that sounds like Hitler, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound just like Hitler? What he supposedly meant by that was, we Jewish people are in charge of these big companies that do tech business. But here he is advocating the kind of slaughter against the neighbors of Israel that is calculated to turn hatred against Jewish people. Who would do that? Who would do things calculated to turn hatred against the perpetrators? Only the kind of globalists that have made all of these wars. And I'm talking about all the wars. These are the people that backed Hitler. So that's the enemy. And it's not for the benefit of any of the people in these wars. Those are on a lower level, however smart they think they are.
Tony, I was happy to see the famous Kirkus Reviews did a review of your book, and by and large, very positive. There was one spot that I was really troubled by in that review, and it was just what you were just saying brings up the subject. The reviewer said that you refrained from using the anti-Semitic term globalists but you were
refrain from explaining it, is what they said.
From what?
They said that I did not properly explain what I meant by it.
Well, the implication in the review was that if you use the word globalist, that it's code word for being anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
I never heard that in my life, but I'm horrified at the amount of persecution of people who criticize Israeli policy around the world right now. I was just studying about the Heritage Foundation's involvement in quashing any pro-Palestinian speech.
The funny thing about that, John,
tell me about
criticize Israel in this book. I'm taking on the globalists directly, and I know who they are, and I'm the one who's I'm the expert on this. Who are they? It's this transatlantic group. You have to understand the background of this. This is really important. What does it mean to be an American? A lot of our people came over here from England, right, to begin with, when it was an English colony, and the British Empire at the time was committing crimes, and they became more and more unimaginable crimes. So to the extent that Americans have a separate identity as a nation and as a people, it's how we separated ourselves from the British Empire, not from England per se. Yes, we needed nominal independence to be a country, get our own government, but the problem is the empire and its way of thinking. So there's all kinds of implications to that. There's religious implications to that. The empire contends that God does not have proper rule of the world, but that the devil does, namely them. That people who have absolutely no morality and who essentially hate the idea of the human advancement, that they are properly in control of the world. That's the divine right of kings. And so we don't agree with that. So to the extent that, and of course, we believe in free will and advancement. They try to sell the idea that the Bible or Christianity supports the devil ruling the world. That comes directly from these imperialists. That's not Christianity. So if you want to be an American, you have to separate yourself from the empire. It's the idea of sovereignty. It's the idea of independence. It's the idea of advancement. And it's the idea of what it means to be human. Remember, who we are is not just Americans, but human beings created in the image of God. And part of that, by the way, that I really enjoy, sort of Providence has brought about. I have a good substantial section of this volume 2 that just came out about Pope Leo XIII. You'll get to that later on in the book. And now we have a new pope since this book was published. Guess what he calls himself? Pope Leo the 14th. And I know what the heritage, the proper good heritage of Leo the 13th was. A friend of mine said to me that, well, isn't it wonderful that this new pope has, said that a proper family is a man married to a woman and giving birth to children. And I said, well, that's a good start, but what about the other side of what Pope Leo the 13th was for? Not just sacredness of human life, but what about after the child's born? Do you think that people have the right to have a decent standard of living and to have a good life instead of being destroyed by satanic oligarchs? How about having industry? How about having jobs? How about having nuclear power plants and the space program and high-speed trains? How about having high-wage industries? Does that go along with the green agenda? I don't know what Pope Francis believed in, but I think he was pretty oriented to that. So, I show in my book that Pope Leo the 13th, back in the late 19th century, was an ally of the developing USA and developing Germany on behalf of the rights of labor. Working people have the right to a high standard of living and not to be told you have to starve because it's more in accord with nature for you to be backward and starve, like they tell people in Africa. That's the green agenda. I'm sorry. You're going to solve pollution. You're going to solve all kinds of problems with modern science, with high energy industries. You're not going to solve it by telling people to starve and not using energy. That's just imperialism. So we're talking about the heart of strategic issues when you get into the religious realm and other realms as well. American history has it all.
I look forward to reading your chapter on Leo the 13th. He's one of my favorite popes and one of the most interesting characters of the 19th century. That I started studying him because I was studying the background of my family, and my grandfather, having been the first in my father's line to go to college, went to Catholic University, a university founded by by Cardinal Gibbons, who was a great ally of Leo the 13th, and the other point being that the Catholic Church had no problem with slavery whatsoever, had no interest in labor, in workers' rights, and as a matter of fact was very much aligned with the empires and monarchs of history. The motto of Elizabeth the First was Semper Eadem, which also happens to be the motto of Prince George's County, Maryland, where I grew up. And that's why I studied it. It means always the same. Everything is the same, the pasture is always going to be there. The slaves or servants are always going to be taking care of the animals and building the things, and it's going to go on generation after generation. It's never going to change. Semper Eadem, the dream of the empire to always have serfs and slaves and useful people that can be disposed of when you don't need them anymore, because after all, God is looking to you to run the world and not the other way around. It's an attitude that still exists in so many minds around the world.
Leo changed that attitude of the church, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Leo, he's the watershed that he comes in with the idea of, hey, what about these people? Don't they have the right to a decent life? And a big change in the church when he supported unionization.
Yeah, and so he worked with the nationalists in the USA, in the church, but also the idea of the buildup of modernization, industrialization, and also directly when that was going on in Germany, where Bismarck broke with the British free trade system, and uh, and he had a conflict with the Catholic Church, and it was stupid. It was pitting the Germans against each other, and so Bismarck pursued of peace with the Catholic Church, peace with Russia, and friendship with the United States. Wouldn't that be a better world instead of the world that we got in the 20th century of two world wars, communism, and atomic bombings and everything else? We didn't need that. America was on the road to having friendship with all these countries. And the Catholic Church and other churches of the 19th century, to the extent that they oriented to this concept of man in the image of God, we're part of that process. When they're not, I'm sorry, they're part of something that is hostile to the purposes of, I believe, of man and God. So we need a lot of soul searching right now, and the right kind of history can help us with that.
Well, from what you've said earlier in the show, the Americans were not able to finance the better railroad or the better steel mill, and that's why the deep pockets of the Anglo-American banking industry were able to come in and finance things like Rockefeller and all the other things that are still the tentacles of empire that could control our lives today. But
Well, I think that just let's just clarify that we did finance our own industry. The Rockefeller and Morgan and the British banks, Baring, Rothschild, they put money into these things, but they did not create any of these industries. They didn't believe in it. J.P. Morgan explicitly said, "I'm not going to build any new industries. I'm only going to put money into things that are complete and basically take them over." So yes, they put money into America, but more and more it was to grab a hold of and monopolize our industries, and eventually to suck the blood out of them and destroy them. They closed them down. These people, that transatlantic establishment, deindustrialized the United States in the end, and they were always opposed to the original strategy for industrializing the United States. That's a fact. That's the contest going on that I described all the way back to the American Revolution times.
well, speaking of time, it's time to wrap it up. But I want to know what, in your opinion, can ordinary people do? Learn the history, obviously. Read the book. Listen to Tony, as you can find him, and many other blogs around the internet. But as individuals, what should we look at in terms of politics, in terms of our personal life choices, to try to get America back into the possession of we the people?
Put your mind and your heart into studying what is the background of our greatness as human beings and as citizens, and also where are how did we go wrong? Part of what I have in this volume 2 is about the crimes against the Native Americans, against the Indians.
Yes.
And you have to appreciate the USA and the great accomplishments and contributions to humanity that our country made. You have to appreciate that in order to be able to properly criticize the USA for not living up to its ideals and doing these terrible crimes repeatedly against the Indians, and then keeping this going now. Why are we sending bombs out to murder people around the world? That continues what we were doing against the Indians. You know, we had a fight of civil war about slavery, and the nationalists were the ones who organized the fight to eliminate slavery. It wasn't these financiers. It wasn't the transatlantic liberals. It was the nationalists who organized the fight for the Union. And so we did have some we have some credit to our name in not simply committing crimes against other races. But what is the problem that we represent if we're a menace to the world? Are we an empire? Are we part of that old British Empire? Are we Anglo-Americans? Oh, what happened to the Declaration of Independence? And what it says in there, all men are created equal. You have to choose, but you have to be able to go back in our history as citizens and our history as human beings in many dimensions and see what was good and report that to your friends and to your political leaders. Get some new leadership. We need new leadership that has the guts to say we went wrong, particularly after the murder of Kennedy. We took our country's industry down. We joined imperialism. That's not our system. Our system is the Constitution and building up our own industries. That's our system. So let's get back to that, who we are.
Who We Are, available on Amazon in paperback or Kindle, and I'm definitely in favor of the paperback. So I look forward to getting my copy, Tony, but I've been reading the advanced copy you sent me on our show. I'll be reading my next part of Tony's book, Who We Are, Volume 2, next Monday at this time slot, 11 a.m. Eastern. So join me for that and catch up with the book after you get your copy from Amazon. Tony Chaitkin, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, John.
All right, everybody have a great afternoon. Bye now.